So we're looking at nutrient cycles today. There are some nutrients that cycle globally, and so these would be atmospheric nutrients like nitrogen and oxygen and carbon dioxide. And then there are other nutrients that cycle very locally. So these would be elements that aren't really in the atmosphere much. So phosphorus, potassium, calcium, these are in the soil and they get taken up right from the soil. And so those would be very local cycling, unless they're in water, and then you would have a little bit broader of a cycle because or of a distribution because the water can flow. Okay, so when we look at each of these cycles, the carbon cycle, the water cycle, the nitrogen cycle, etc., I want you to look at each chemical's biological importance. So in what molecules is carbon versus nitrogen versus phosphorus, for example, the forms of each chemical available, when is it organic, when is it inorganic, the major reservoirs, meaning is this nutrient mainly in the atmosphere or is it mainly in soil or in rock or both, or all of them. The key processes, like we'll talk about assimilation and photosynthesis. And then the cycling of elements between organic and inorganic reservoirs. So let's take a look at that. There are 4 reservoirs here, reservoir A, B, C, and D. And so the top 2 are organic. That means anything that's organic has 2 or more carbons. So for example, glucose, sugar, is C6H12O6. And so that would be organic because it's got carbon, at least 2 carbons in it. So there are organic materials that are available as nutrients. These are in living organisms, so plants, animals, etc. If those are fossilized, you make fossil fuels, and those are generally unavailable for living things to get energy from, unless you burn them, of course. So anyway, this is another reservoir of organic materials or of elements. If you burn fossil fuels, now they become available again. So they go into the atmosphere or the water or the soil or whatever. When they're available, they can be taken up by the process of assimilation, like when a plant absorbs nitrogen from the soil, or photosynthesis, like when a plant takes in carbon dioxide from the air, or photosynthetic bacterium or whatever. And now it's in the organic form again, right? Because a photoautotroph can take carbon dioxide and make sugar out of it. Whenever plants or animals do cellular respiration or decomposition or excretion, and then bacteria decompose them, we get the inorganic materials, again, that are available to plants, which can again be taken up by the plants and then eaten by the animals, and then plants and animals die and they get decomposed by decomposers like fungi and bacteria, and yada, 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 yada. There's the circle. These inorganic materials can become unavailable if they squish and form sedimentary rock. And so the difference between these really is that the fossil fuels came from organic matter that was squished, whereas the rocks came from inorganic material that was squished. And then, of course, if you weather and erode the rocks, then they're available again. So these are the general reservoirs that elements can be found in. So we're going to look first at the water cycle. And so I'm betting you know most of this already. You need liquid water for organisms to live, right? And so here are the different forms. Here's liquid water and evaporation. Make sure you know that process. Evaporation is the process where water is going from liquid to gas. Condensation is when you form clouds. And you might be familiar with that term when the water from your shower condenses onto the walls and the mirror gets all foggy. That's condensation, right? And then precipitation is rain or snow or some other type of way that water falls to the ground. The water might then percolate through the soil. Another term that you'll need to know is evapotranspiration, which is probably coming up in a little bit. Let's see what else I wanted to say. Don't memorize any of the percents, but there's really not a whole lot of fresh water available in lakes and rivers and groundwater. That's, I guess, the key point here. A lot of our water has salt in it, right? And or it's frozen. Okay, so this term right here, transpiration, I don't think I have. Oh, here it is. I'm sorry. I missed it before. So transpiration is just like evaporation, but it's the evaporation of water through trees or through plants. I kind of would say trees because of transpiration, but through any kind of plant. So transpiration and evaporation are almost the same thing, but with transpiration, we've got it coming out of plants, and evapotranspiration is both. All right, that was it for the water cycle. The carbon cycle. Carbon cycle is super important because every big molecule in your body is made out of carbon, and so we call it organic molecules. So the major organic molecules that we're going to study are carbohydrates, lipids, hopefully these sound familiar from freshman bio, proteins, and nucleic acids. And so the carbon cycle is super important because life on the planet is based on carbon. There's nothing that we've found that has their major major big building block molecule made of anything else. Carbon is it. The reason, of course, is because there are 4 strong covalent bonds that you can make with carbon, but that's a subject for another day. Okay, so carbon dioxide, the way that you get carbon dioxide from the atmosphere into organisms is photosynthesis. And I shouldn't have said you because it's photosynthetic organisms, plants, algae, other protists, bacteria that do photosynthesis. So if you look at all of these arrows, photosynthesis is the only way that you get carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, whether it's aquatic organisms like phytoplankton or whether it's plants that are terrestrial. Then when the plants so the plants will make sugar, right? So that's sugar by photosynthesis. And so now that's organic. So that's changing inorganic carbon, right? It's inorganic if there's only one carbon. So it's changing inorganic carbon to organic carbon, and that's what photosynthesis does. Once the plant has the sugar, it can break it down by cellular respiration to make some ATP, and then that will release carbon dioxide back in the atmosphere. So it's a really common misconception. Sometimes people will think that plants do photosynthesis and animals do cellular respiration, and that is totally true, but plants also do cellular respiration. So cellular respiration adds CO2 to the atmosphere, whether it's done by a plant, an animal, or a decomposer. And then the other thing is if you have organic matter, any of this stuff, and it's squished under the ground for a long time, and then you make fossil fuels, you'll take carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. Right now we are burning lots and lots of fossil fuels, which is adding more and more carbon dioxide to the atmosphere. So here's the general picture of it. Atmospheric carbon dioxide, it's photosynthesis that will take CO2 and put it into plant biomass, which means organic molecules like sugar. Or lipids or proteins or whatever. And then consumption to herbivores and maybe more consumption to carnivores, etc. Decomposition, whether it's plants or animals, will go to the decomposer biomass and then cellular respiration back to the atmosphere. Of course, we've also got cellular respiration of animals and of plants as well. So it should be a little more complex than this. So reservoirs for carbon can include fossil fuels, any carbon that's in the soil. So soil is made out of sand with dead organic stuff in it, and the organic stuff has carbon in it. There can be carbon dioxide in the oceans. It combines with water and will form carbonic acid. And then in the plants and animals themselves, right? And then in the atmosphere is CO2, and it can also get squished into sedimentary rock. So only one thing brings carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, and that's photosynthesis. Cellular respiration and combustion or burning will all add CO2 back to the atmosphere, whether it's cellular respiration by decomposers or cellular respiration by living things. Okay, the one last thing that I don't think was drawn very well is if any of these things die, They can get squished for 1 million years, become fossil fuels. Become fossil fuels, and then if they are burned, they can add CO2 to the atmosphere. Okay, nitrogen cycle. Nitrogen is really important in proteins and nucleic acids, and so if you have plenty of carbon dioxide to do photosynthesis, but you don't have enough nitrogen to make your proteins and your nucleic acids, then if you're a plant, you're not going to be doing more photosynthesis because you won't have enough DNA to do more mitosis or enough proteins to do your life functions. So the main reservoir for nitrogen is actually the atmosphere. The atmosphere is 80% nitrogen, which is a lot, but almost no one can use this nitrogen because the nitrogen, N2, is triple bonded. And those are covalent bonds. They're super, super strong. And plants just don't break it down. So it has to be broken down, though, to ammonia or nitrate and nitrite. And the organisms that will break down N2 into usable nitrogen are the nitrogen fixers. And so plants don't do it, but certain bacteria do. And it takes a lot of ATP to do that. And so that's what this is showing you here. So this would be a legume, which is a special type of plant that has symbiotic bacteria in these special root nodules. The bacteria are getting sugar from the plant, and the plant is getting nitrogen from the bacteria. These bacteria can also live in the soil. So here's the soil, right? And so whether they're bacteria in the soil or bacteria in these nodules, this is the equation. So you start with, atmospheric nitrogen, and it takes a lot of energy, and you're going to end up making usable nitrogen if you're a nitrogen fixing bacterium. Okay, so the organic nitrogen is, so let's just kind of look through all this stuff. So here's nitrogen fixation. The atmospheric nitrogen is fixed by bacteria, certain bacteria, whether they're in root nodules or whether they're in the soil. And so that becomes ammonia and nitrate and nitrite. And so there are different bacteria that will do each step. But assimilation is the process where plants can take up usable nitrogen, right? So that's either here or, occasionally maybe here too. So anyway, the plants get nitrogen, and then the animals will eat the plants, and then the animal, so that's this arrow, then the plants die, or the animals die, or poop, or pee, and then you've got these detrivores, these decomposers that will break down the nitrogen into a usable form that again can be assimilated, right? And then so here are the denitrifying bacteria, which is kind of a bummer. They take usable nitrogen and convert it into basically unusable nitrogen. They convert it back to this nitrogen with these 3 strong bonds. There's 3 strong bonds, but only 2 nitrogen atoms, so that's why it's N2. And then that's just in the atmosphere, and nobody can use it until nitrogen-fixing bacteria do nitrogen fixation again. So this says fixation. Maybe you want to fix that to say nitrogen fixation. Nitrogen fixation. Okay. So you should know the process called nitrogen fixation, maybe assimilation. You should know what decomposition is. I wouldn't worry about ammonification or nitrification. Denitrification might come up because that's getting rid of nitrogen from our soils. The last thing to notice about this is if you have nitrogen that maybe you're spreading on a crop, that can leach out into water and cause cultural eutrophication, which we talked about in a different video. So if this stuff happens near a lake, it can be bad because the limiting nutrient in the lake might very much be nitrogen. Okay, phosphorus cycle, very similar to the nitrogen cycle without the atmospheric stuff. So phosphorus is important because it's in nucleic acids like DNA, RNA, and ATP. So here's the phosphorus group, or 3 of them in ATP. So this one is DNA, this one is ATP, and then also phospholipids have phosphorus in them as well. So with the phosphorus cycle, the atmosphere is not a huge reservoir for phosphorus. It's generally in the soil. And so plants take it up. That's assimilation. Animals eat the plants, and then they all die, and the decomposers will um, put it into a form that plants can take up again. And there's that circle of life. If it leaches out into the water, then phytoplankton can use it. Again, it's assimilation there. Decomposition, assimilation, yada, yada, yada. Sedimentation will take it out of the available reservoirs, put it into an unusable reservoir for a bit. But those sediments, when they form rocks, eventually, as the tectonic plates move, geological uplift happens. You get some rocks that can be worn down. And then when they get worn down, they can add phosphorus to the soil. And now we have assimilation again. Yay! Let's see. Rates at which nutrients cycle are different in different ecosystems, mainly because of decomposition. And so decomposers are super important to nutrient cycling in general because they make nutrients available to plants again. Let's see, the decomposition is faster with more temperature and more water.